If you want to try canning, there's a lot of tools that you'll want to pick up before you do it. It isn't necessarily that expensive, and all of the items last for basically forever. So once you have them, you can be canning for years and years and years with them. And I'm going to show you what we use, the items that are basics, but also a couple of extra things that really make things a lot easier, especially once you start canning quite a few things. So the first thing you'll want is a water bath canner, and it's just basically a big pot. This is the traditional one. You can get it all over the place, Canadian Tire, Walmart, for not very expensive. And it will come with a rack that will fit right inside of it. This is our rack. It's very rusty because we've been using it for years, but the rest doesn't matter. It'll probably last for a few more decades before we'll need to buy a new one. And with a rack like this, it has these little notches, and that allows you to bring the canner up and down and have it set up so that you can more easily put the jars in and out of the water. Now, another thing you'll absolutely need is, of course, the jars themselves. This is an 8-ounce jar, which is about 1 cup. And this sort of jar you'll use for probably jams, that sort of thing. The next size up is the pint jar. This one's really, really common. You can buy any of these jars in a set of 6 or 12. These are the standard one. You'll be using it for things like smaller batches of pickles. Some jam recipes you might be able to can in the larger jars as well. Another one that is also a pint jar is this one, but this one is a wide mouth jar. And these are really nice if you're pickling things, especially cucumbers. It's much, much easier to put all the cucumbers in it without trying to squeeze your hand into the much smaller space. It just has a nice wide opening. And the next size up is another really standard size. This is the quart jar. It's about 1 liter. You can get it in the wide mouth as well, but we just have the standard, which makes it a little more difficult to try and squeeze all your cucumbers in there. And to go with your jars, you'll need seals. And this is a standard size seal, and this is the wide mouth seal. So depending on what kind of jar, you want to make sure you get the right ones. And you'll always want to use new ones each time that you can something. They're really inexpensive. You can even pick some of them up at the dollar store, the brand name ones, and we often do that. And it has 2 sides. Once you're done canning, you can write whatever, the description, the name of whatever it is that you've made on the one side. And this side is what keeps your food safe. This little rubber ring is, as it's in the boiling water bath, it heats up and squeezes right into the actual jar itself. And the other thing that's a safety measure on these is it has a little pop-up, and you can hear it. And once it's finished canning and sits on your counter for the 24 hours that the recipe generally calls for, it will actually suck that in. And it needs to actually stay sucked in up until the time that you actually take it out of storage and go to open it up. If it is already popped up when you go to take it out of storage, that means that your seal has failed, and you want to make sure that you don't actually eat that. The next thing you'll need is a screw band or a ring, and you can get them in the 2 sizes, the standard size or the wide mouth. These ones you can reuse for years and years and years. They can get a bit rusty, and that's not a big deal. And these are what you use to finish assembling your jars. So you take your jar, you fill it full of whatever you're canning, follow the recipe for how they say to fill it up. Then you put the seal on top of that, and then you put the screw band on top of that. And you just need to close it finger tight. You don't need to wrench it shut. The whole purpose of the screw band is just to keep the seal on as you have it in the water bath and as the seal is forming. The next thing you'll need, you probably already have it in your kitchen, is just a small pot. That is so that you can prepare your seals. So you just basically boil a little bit of water, put the seals in there, and that just keeps them nice and warm, and that little rubbery ring gets it ready so that it creates a proper seal. The next thing that is really, really handy, the first time that I canned, I didn't actually have this, and I should have just gone to the store and spent the $12 on the little set, because it is absolutely essential. It is a set of 4 different things. There's a funnel, a little magnet lifter thing, this little guy, and a jar lifter. Now I'm going to show you what each and every one of those things do. Jar lifter lifts jars. And the first time I used it, before I got it, I used tongs. It was a huge pain. These, you can just lift the jars in and out of the water. You don't have to worry about getting boiling water all over yourself. So this is absolutely handy. The next thing is the magnetic lifter. That's so you can take your pot that has the seals in it with boiling water, and you just lift it right out and you can put it straight onto your jar. This little gizmo is a headspace tool. It has this little graduated little stair step, and that's so when you're you follow the recipe, your canning recipe will say how much headspace you need. Headspace is the gap of air that's in between, say, your brine or your jam and then the top of the jar. Often it's a quarter space or a quarter inch space or half inch space, and so you just look on the little step. It'll say what step is what distance. So this is a quarter inch, this is half inch, and you can just measure that way. So it's really handy. The other end is also a tool. This is your bubble remover. Depending on what you're making, when you pour it into the jar, it can create a lot of bubbles, and you want to get rid of those bubbles. So you just use that end to remove the bubbles. And the last thing is a funnel. This thing is absolutely handy. You may already have one already, but it comes in the kit with everything else for not very expensive. So it's a really wide end funnel, which is really handy if you're making, it really fits really nicely with jars. It fits right in the standard jar head. And this will just keep your kitchen from becoming a giant mess as you can. And one more thing that's really handy is getting one or two of the canning companies' cookbooks. They have done the proper testing, so you can follow any of these books and you don't have to worry about whether they follow the proper canning guidelines. So this one is really fantastic. It's really, really thick. It has, I don't know, a couple hundred recipes, 400 recipes, that's right on the cover. And it has everything from all sorts of jams and jellies, pickles, salsas, ketchups, things like that. And this is another one. This is the Bernardin Book of Home Preserving. It's much thinner, but it also has a really great variety of a lot of the traditional canning recipes, but also things on how to freeze and preserve foods in other ways other than canning. So those are really the standard things that you'll need when you can. There's a few other things that make things a little easier. If you're making jam, depending on the recipe, you might need pectin. This is liquid pectin. Some recipes call for powdered pectin. If you use pectin, it makes the jam recipe a lot easier to make. Another thing, if you're making jellies, you'll want some sort of a cheesecloth. This is a jelly bag, and this is what we use if we need to remove all the seeds and all the skins to get a nice clear jelly. And one more thing that we occasionally use, this water bath canner, this is a standard size, but it doesn't actually fit the larger jars. So we use actually just a big stock pot. So this is our stock pot, and it gives enough space so that you have enough water above the jars as they're boiling. And sometimes we actually have both of these canners on the go, just depending if we're making a huge recipe. And you want to make sure, if you're using a stock pot, you want to make sure you get a rack for it. We picked up this rack. It's really handy. It has two different sides, so this side fits the smaller jars, and this side fits the larger jars. And you put it on the bottom, and then you just set your jars on top. And this just keeps the jars from actually touching the bottom of the canner or the stock pot, and it'll get too hot if you have them right on the very bottom, and it also keeps the jars from rattling around and hitting each other. And these are all the things that you'll need or want if you want to do some canning. The last couple things were optional, but the first few things will really make your life easier.